This reading today, and in particular the passage from the Bible from Jesus, as many of us know, comes right out of Patanjali's Yamas and Niyamas, the concept of ahimsa, or non-violence. These are not exactly laws in the way that the Ten Commandments are treated as laws, but they're very similar. Many of the words are actually very similar, in fact. But these yamas and niyamas are more of tendencies of behavior, the spirit of the law, as the reading said. And everything it said in terms of the actual deed, the action of violence versus that, am I doing violence inside with my thoughts, with my intentions? There's a story in Autobiography of a Yogi that is exactly what Jesus is talking about, where Yogananda is sitting at the feet of his guru, Sri Yukteswar. This is the mosquito story that many of us are familiar with. Listening to Yukteswar espouse on whatever it was he was teaching at that moment, a mosquito lands on Yogananda. He raises a hand, catches himself. Yukteswar then replies, "Why not finish the job? The death blow has already been dealt in your mind," which is exactly what Jesus is saying there in the gospel there. This spirit of the law that Patanjali is talking about has subtleties and layers to it, not just in the deed versus the intention of wishing to harm. Swami Kriyananda talks about in many other places and many other writings how though that spirit of ahimsa, the spirit of nonviolence, can play out in many, many different ways. When we judge others, for example, calling them a sinner, for example, that weakness that we are seeing in somebody else is a reflection of some weakness within ourselves. And that we're really calling out, and it's a call to look with introspection within ourselves. What is it that I want to change? Forgetting about them for the moment. That in itself can play out. It doesn't even have to be about other people. It can be those tapes that so many of us have running in our own head of, I made a mistake and I am such a terrible person, or any other subtlety of this energy that ultimately is what gets us further away from God. And that's really, in the teachings of yoga, what a sin is. It's not about how I and many of us learn what sin is from the Catholic Church, in my case, of the black mark upon the soul and eternal damnation to hell and all those kinds of things. It's simply I'm getting further away from God versus I can choose to get closer to God. There's no standing still. I'm either always getting further away or getting closer. And so with ahimsa, with this yama of nonviolence, if I do have those thoughts, it's okay. In other parts of the Bible, in the gospel, Jesus forgives people. There's the one woman, the adulteress, where he says, go forth and sin no more. So it wasn't about the past deeds. It's that forgiveness of, can I turn it around and get back to the path towards God and get closer? And that's really what the spirit of this law, because that's not a law of absolutely don't do that. Now, yes, it would be better not to do that, but I don't think many of us are in that situation where we're actually wishing such harm that we wish somebody to die. Maybe. I had brothers. I was a brother. I might have upset them a great deal, but I don't think quite to that degree. There's another story, an autobiography of a yogi, that caught my attention as I was considering this deeds versus intentions. Again, it's a story, an autobiography that many of us have heard, that Yogananda is actually retelling of the three hermits. It originates from Tolstoy, the Russian novelist, where there are three hermits. They live on an island, and they have a very simple prayer. We are three, thy are three, have mercy on us. Very, very, that's it. That's the entire prayer. But it's been known that as they say that prayer, very simply, miracles manifest. And there's no explanation as to why it just happens around them, to them, all over this island. The local bishop hears of this simple prayer and he says, I'm going to sail out to that island. I'm going to teach them some some proper ways to pray, some better ways to pray. So he goes out there, and the hermits are like, oh, thank you, your eminence, or whatever it is that they called him. He teaches them. They're like, oh, thank you, thank you, thank you. He's like, okay, good, I'm done. And he goes to leave, gets on his boat, he's sailing away, and he looks back behind him, and he sees this bright light, and it's growing bigger, getting stronger, and getting closer and closer. And he realizes it's the three hermits running after him. He's on a boat. They're not walking on water, they're running on water. And they catch up to him, and they're like, oh, we forgot what those prayers were. Can you please teach us again? He realizes the fall. I said, you're good. Keep doing what you've been doing. And that's what he did. He judged the deed of the simple prayer without looking into their hearts, that devotion. It might be simple devotion, but it was so pure in their hearts that's how the miracles manifested. In fact, the hermits themselves were so focused on the deed, they weren't paying attention to, so focused on the intention and that intention of drawing that Christ consciousness to them, they weren't paying attention to the deeds. The deeds, the miracles, didn't really matter. The reason I like the story is because it takes the intention and deed of doing harm and it kind of flips it in reverse. And having the intention, the thoughts of higher consciousness, of our true soul self, letting the deeds be whatever they will be. But that's the opposite of I'm getting further away from God by getting closer to God. I also found it interesting that story that Yogananda tells opens the chapter that's called The Law of Miracles. Now, obviously, the hermits are performing miracles. We don't really get to hear in that little passage what those miracles are, but Yogananda goes on to describe several other miracles. The first one he starts with is the miracle that Einstein experienced, his theory of relativity that ultimately led to the constant speed of light is what binds everything in the universe together, the E equals mc squared. He said it just came to him in a flash. He didn't understand it. It took him 10 years of being with that to understand it and to prove it. And only then did he start talking about it. Only then did people realize, maybe a small group of people, the genius of that. Now, I can't speak to what Einstein's spirituality was. Was it a miracle? Was it just an inspired moment of inspiration? What's the difference? We're sort of splitting hairs at some point here. Because of the subtlety of the miracle, and Yogananda goes on to describe a couple experiences he had. I'll, for the sake of argument, just say conversations he had with God. And one of the things he says is that these subtleties God brings down to mankind, to humankind, when they are ready and able to understand them. Meaning that it wasn't until Einstein received that gift, that inspiration of the theory of relativity, only then was humankind ready to understand. It still took him another 10 years to explain it, but these subtleties of, as we get closer to God, things will be revealed to us as we are ready to understand them, both as individuals, but also as a group, as all of us, any of us. So I liked that sort of law of miracles, the subtleties of how, one of the ways that we can get closer to God, flipping this nonviolence around and coming back to what can I hold as the intentions, as my thoughts? What inspirations can I draw to help me get closer to God? The deeds will take care of themselves and not focus on the deeds. As I was reading that chapter in Autobiography of a Yogi on the Law of Miracles, and then going about the rest of my week, and there was one day this week that, let's just say there was a lot of things that were not quite going the way I had planned them. It was a little frustrating I was trying to do this and I couldn't do that, and I was trying to do that and I couldn't do that, and it just kind of kept getting thwarted in this particular day, and got towards the end of the day and I was like, okay, I still have more to do, but I just need to step away from the computer, step away from the desk. I need to just take a break. And I went out into the book and gift shop, and Lakshmi was sitting there, and I just went, just took a deep breath, and she's like, what's going on? And I didn't focus, fortunately, this was grace, on what was frustrating me. But for some reason, I decided to tell her about this chapter, the law of miracles, the story of the three hermits and so on. It only took a few minutes. She's read it. She knows it. And I realized very quickly that sort of funk that I was in was gone. It had dissipated. That by retelling the story, by putting myself in that light, by sharing the miracle of what the hermits were experiencing, I had shifted things for myself. One of the things that Yogananda talks about in these miracles that God is telling him is that really it's all just light and shadows. And it just seems very real to us who are not yet realized. But God was showing him, this is one of the miracles that he describes in this chapter, how this light and shadow plays out, and it's not really as firm as we feel it when we touch things. But that light and shadow has a very real effect on us. That funk that I was in, the frustrations that I was feeling became a shadow, became a blockage for me to realize God. I was getting further away from God in that sense. And by turning that around, by getting away from no longer immersing myself in what it was that wasn't working and putting myself in the light, sharing the light that comes from the masters, sharing the light that comes from these miracles, helped relieve the shadow that I was experiencing and come back to those moments of light. Yesterday, we had an opportunity to share in a small little class here that we called Walking in Faith. And there was one, faith being what Swami Kriyananda and Paramhansa Yogananda both talk about. There's a difference between faith and belief. Belief is sort of blind belief, that I don't have an experience of that, but I believe that that's true. Faith is rooted in an experience. So maybe before faith, we have a belief that this is true, and then we can have an experience. I can believe that there is a God, but until I actually have an experience of God, maybe it's in a meditation, maybe it's in a deep prayer, maybe it's in another person in front of me, those are the moments that we build on with faith. I won't go too far down the road, but I think you get the gist of the difference between faith and belief. But faith are those moments when we have the experiences of God that we can draw upon to have more moments and experiences of God. They are unshakable. I may forget about those moments of faith, but if I just remember that moment that I had, brings it right back to the present. So this is one of the ways that we walk our life with faith. Viveka Devi was sharing a story, the details don't really matter, but in the story that was a very challenging part of her life, she said, it was so big, it was bigger than my faith, which meant it was a call to increase my faith. And this is how we walk the path. This is how we get closer to God. We get to choose when we have a difficult moment, however big or however small. Do I want to sort of cower and be in that difficulty and just kind of churn with it and be in those emotions, be in those difficulties, or not worry about how good or bad it was and come back to where's my faith? Come back to spiritual practices that will help bring light into my heart, into my spiritual heart, bring light into my whole being, bring light around me. We all have spiritual practices that we can rely on for this, whether that be in meditation, in prayer, in satsang, in seva. Those are 4 great ways. There's many, many others, of course. And so those calls of deepening our faith come from those moments of difficulty. The moments of difficulty equate to those deeds that the actions themselves don't matter. Whether I made a mistake, whether I'm experiencing karma, whatever it is, what matters is, can I move above that and come into what is it that's trying to happen? Can I return to the call for God's presence and remember God's presence? Again, different ways. Sometimes what I do is I'll come back to a chant. I'll come back to a whispers, like what Marie read, of this all-encompassing sense of what is it that's really trying to happen here. to not judge myself over a moment of weakness, to not judge myself for some mistake, and in fact, quite the opposite. Don't be afraid of my mistakes. Don't be afraid to make a mistake. If I'm not making mistakes, I'm not trying hard enough. I'm protecting myself. I'm fearful of the mistakes. If I'm not fearful of mistakes, then I'm doing things with light. I'm calling on the light of the masters. I'm calling on the divine light. Even if I don't feel the light within me, I can still call on others to help. Even if I'm in a funk, I can go have satsang even just with one person sitting in the bookshop and just relaying what I'm reading, an autobiography of a yogi. There's light there. And isn't that a miracle? What is a miracle? We are surrounded by miracles all the time, even if we don't recognize them. Miracles are not just things that happen by the avatars. We're coming up on one of the greatest miracles that's ever been recorded, Easter Sunday, when Jesus was crucified, died, was buried, and 3 days later, he arose. He walked out. Yes, those are big, those are helpful, those are important, but there's smaller miracles, whatever smaller means. I mean, the mind wants to apply a scale to whatever a miracle might be, but ultimately, in the face of challenge, in the face of difficulty, if I can remember, turn towards the light. If I can remember, call on my spiritual brothers and sisters, call on all those practices, isn't that a miracle too? Because it's going to help me get closer to God. And if I call on somebody to help me, doesn't it help them get closer to God too? If I provide the sort of the inspiration for them to provide seva to me, helps them as well. This is really the essence of seva. Asha has a book, Loved and Protected, where she counts, 40 different stories or something like that, of people in and around Ananda, around the world. Maybe they're central within Ananda, maybe they're just peripheral, but every one is a story of a miracle. Everyday miracles, unexplainable miracles. So this is how we get the subtlety of the laws, and we switch it from don't do this yet and feel judged to how can I turn that around? Look at my intentions. Look at my inspirations, those moments of faith, string them together to bring them into the present moment, because that's all that really matters. The fact that that moment of building faith happened whenever in the past, remembering it is bringing it into the present to help carry me through, to have yet another moment later on. This is a part of how, as the line from the festival is we are a part of all that is. Because every time I remember to call on the light, to bring the light, that light is automatically shared. Whether I intend it or not, it gets shared. That's what that bishop realized when the 3 hermits came running after him over the water. They were sharing that grace with the bishop, and he got it. He didn't have to dwell on, well, I totally misjudged them. It's like, he got it. This is how miracles work. In fact, Patanjali says when the yama of ahimsa is perfected, of nonviolence, that even wild animals, wild tigers and lions, there is nothing but pure love between those beings. And it's not just animals, it's not just people, it's all matters. The way matter exists this is what we are a part of all that is, all that ever has been, all that ever will be. So calling on that light for each other, with each other, especially as we enter into this Easter season, is a call for all of us. Blessings.
We'll have some music now.
Sing out with joy. All our nights have ended. Sing on every mountain, oh, sing in every valley. Sing within your soul that you live in the Lord. Sing on every mountain, oh, sing in every valley. Sing within your soul that you live in the Lord. Sing, sing, sing out with joy, God's light has descended. Sing out with joy, all our nights have ended. Sing out, O people, sing to the Lord. Sing, sing out with joy, we live in the Lord. Sing on the mountains, sing on the plains. Fill your heart with gladness, for Jesus has come. Oh, you who labor, oh, you who sorrow, know that the Savior always but your love. Joy on every mountain, joy in every valley, joy has come to earth, welcome Christ in your soul. Joy in every meadow, joy in every home, joy will come to you once you live in the Lord. Sing out with joy, God's light has descended. Sing out with joy, all our nights have ended. Sing out with joy, God's light has descended. Sing out with